Imagine moving into what you thought was your dream neighborhood. Brand new houses, friendly faces, the kind of place where families were starting fresh. But just 3 months later, I came home to find a thick packet taped to my door. A legal notice threatening to put a lien on my house. The HOA claimed I owed them over $4,000 for things like leaving a trash can outside, parking in my own driveway, even installing a doorbell camera. I thought it had to be a mistake, but when I tried to fight back, I discovered a dark little secret hidden deep inside the HOA's own bylaws. And once I found it, I used their rules to bring the entire HOA board to its knees. When I first moved into that Florida neighborhood, I thought I had finally found the perfect place to settle down. The streets were lined with brand new houses, all identical in that classic cookie-cutter style, and every weekend it seemed like more moving trucks were arriving. Within weeks, the ghost town of empty lots and fresh construction turned into a bustling community filled with new families. At first, the energy was exciting. Kids were riding their bikes, neighbors were introducing themselves, and everything had that fresh start feeling. On paper, the neighborhood had one of those homeowners associations that was supposed to keep things beautiful. At the time, I didn't think too much about it. Almost every neighborhood in Florida has an HOA, and while people complain about them, I figured it couldn't be that bad. After all, how much trouble could a group of neighbors really cause? At first, it felt like nothing to worry about. HOA seemed invisible. No one knocked on my door. No one complained when I set up my patio furniture, and I went about life believing the worst of the HOA horror stories didn't apply to me. But that illusion shattered in the 3rd month after. I moved in. One afternoon I came home and noticed a large packet taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was some kind of flyer or community notice, but when I pulled it off the door and saw the words stamped across the top, my stomach dropped. It was a notice of intent to lien. If you've never dealt with one of these, let me explain. A lien is a legal claim against your property. It's the first step toward an HOA being able to force you to pay fines, or worse, to foreclose on your house. In simple terms, it's a threat that says, pay us or we'll come after your home. I stood there on my porch, flipping through the packet, my hands actually trembling as I read the list of supposed violations. According to the HOA, I was guilty of a number of offenses. The first was that I had failed to keep my garbage cans out of sight. Now here's the thing. My trash cans were tucked neatly to the side of the house, exactly where I'd seen dozens of my neighbors keep theirs. Yet somehow, I was singled out. The next violation claimed there was standing water between the sides of my house and the one next door. That one wasn't even my fault. It was a grading issue that I'd already been battling with the developer about, but instead of helping, the HOA had decided to fine me. Another violation accused me of parking one of my vehicles in the driveway, but slightly over the sidewalk line. They made it sound like I was blocking traffic, when in reality, the nose of my car might have extended a few inches past the edge. Then they claimed my bushes weren't trimmed appropriately, whatever that meant, and that I had made unapproved modifications by installing a Ring doorbell camera. Each page listed another absurd charge, and by the time I got to the last one, I saw the total amount they claimed I owed, $4,032.12. That number hit me like a punch in the chest. Over $4,000 in fines, late fees, and legal costs. For trash cans, bushes, and a doorbell camera. I sat there stunned, trying to wrap my head around how things had gone so wrong, so quickly. I'd been in the neighborhood for only a few months, and already I was facing the threat of losing my home over nonsense violations. Naturally, the first thing I did was fire off an email to the HOA, demanding an explanation. I figured there had to be a mistake. Maybe they'd mix me up with someone else, or maybe this was just some kind of automated notice that would get cleared up quickly. But no. I sent email after email, day after day, and got nothing back. Silence. Frustrated, I sent another message, this time more hostile, threatening legal action if they didn't respond. That finally got their attention, but not in the way I hoped. Their reply was short and smug. All communications regarding violations will only be addressed via communication. Methods approved in the bylaws. That's when the panic started to set in. The bylaws. I didn't even have a copy of the bylaws. Like most new homeowners, I had been given the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions and restrictions, which explain what you can and can't do with your property. But the bylaws, the actual rules about how violations are handled, had never been provided. How was I supposed to follow rules I didn't even have? I asked them for a copy. Their response? All requests for the bylaws must be submitted via approved communication methods, as per the bylaws. It was a perfect catch-22. I needed the bylaws to know how to request the bylaws. I remember sitting there, fuming, staring at my computer screen. The HOA was playing games with me, and I knew they had me trapped. For a moment, I felt like I was already beaten. But then I thought about it more carefully. If Edmond Dantes could spend 14 years in prison plotting his revenge in the Count of Monte Cristo, maybe I could take a breath, step back and figure out how to turn this around. After all, the notice said I had 45 days. It had only been a couple of days since I received it. I still had time. And that's when I made the decision. If they wanted to play by the letter of the bylaws, then I would get my hands on those bylaws. And I would use their own rules against them. The first step in my plan was simple. I needed the bylaws. Without them, I was blind. I couldn't fight back because I didn't know what rules the HOA was actually hiding behind. Most homeowners never think about this. They move in, they get a copy of the CC&Rs, and they assume that's all they'll ever need. The CC&Rs tell you things like how tall your grass can grow, what color you can paint your house, or whether you're allowed to park an RV in the driveway. But the bylaws, those are different. The bylaws are the operating manual for the HOA itself. They spell out how violations must be reported, how hearings are requested, and how communication is supposed to happen. In other words, they're the HOA's rule book for playing the game. And somehow I had moved into this neighborhood without ever being given that rule book. When I demanded a copy, they repeated the same smug response. All requests must be submitted via approved communication methods as per the bylaws. It was almost laughable. How could I follow rules I didn't even have? The HOA had created a perfect trap. Most people, faced with that kind of bureaucratic nonsense, would give up. They'd throw their hands in the air and pay whatever fine was slapped in front of them just to make the problem go away. But I'm not most people. I decided to take another route. You see, in Florida, the developer of a neighborhood is the one who drafts the original legal documents. The CC&Rs, the bylaws, everything. And in my case, the developer was still active, still technically responsible for parts of the community. I already had an open line of communication with them because of another issue. The grading problem on my lot that was causing the standing water between houses. I had been pestering them about that for weeks, so one afternoon, I sent an email to my contacts at the developer's office. I didn't even mention the HOA fines at first. I just politely asked if they had a copy of the neighborhood's bylaws. To my surprise, within minutes a PDF appeared in my inbox. It was almost too easy. I don't think they wanted me adding one more complaint to the long list of problems I was already raising with them, so they just handed it over. And that's when everything changed. I opened the document and started reading. At first, it was all the usual boring legal language, articles, sections, subsections, the kind of stuff that would put you to sleep in a heartbeat. But then, I found it. Buried in Article 9, under the section about communications, was the golden ticket. Every single communication between the HOA and homeowners had to be done by certified mail. Not just some communications, not just the important ones. All of them. If the HOA wanted to notify me of a violation, certified mail. If they wanted to tell me I hadn't fixed the violation, certified mail. If they wanted to add a late fee, certified mail. Every single piece of communication, every step of the process, had to arrive in my mailbox with that little green sticker attached. Proof that it had been sent, tracked, and delivered. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, because if that was true, then something didn't add up. Remember that massive packet they taped to my front door? According to the bylaws, that was already invalid. It hadn't been sent by certified mail, and that wasn't the only problem. The packet listed 8 unique violations, some of them repeated over a period of weeks. By the letter of the bylaws, I should have received a separate certified notice for each one, then another certified notice for each failure to cure, then more notices for the late fees that followed. By my rough math, I should have received around 22 individual certified letters, and how many had I actually received? 0, not a single one. That was the moment the light bulb went on in my head. The HOA wasn't following their own rules. They were cutting corners, skipping steps and hoping no one would notice. But I had noticed, and now I had their entire system of enforcement in the palm of my hand. I could almost feel the shift inside me. A few days earlier, I had been scared, overwhelmed, ready to give up. Now I was calm, focused. I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. If the HOA was doing this to me, they were probably doing it to everyone in the neighborhood. How many of my neighbors had quietly paid hundreds or even thousands of dollars in bogus fines just because they didn't know the rules? How many people had been intimidated into silence by the threat of a lien, never realizing the HOA hadn't even followed its own bylaws? That's when the idea of revenge, or maybe justice, started to take shape. I didn't want to just clear my own name. I wanted to expose the HOA for what they were doing. I wanted to make them choke on their own rules. For the first time since moving in, I wasn't afraid of the HOA anymore. I was ready to fight. And I was going to use their own weapon, certified mail, to do it. Once I understood the bylaws, I knew I couldn't just sit quietly and hope the problem went away. The HOA had backed me into a corner, but what they didn't realize was that they had handed me the perfect weapon. Every single rule they had ignored was now going to be turned against them, one certified letter at a time. I decided my strategy would be twofold. The first step was about information. If I was the only one fighting, the HOA could dismiss me as just one angry homeowner. But if the whole neighborhood realized what was happening, the board would have a much bigger problem on their hands. The second step would be personal. I was going to fight every single violation they had accused me of, line by line, letter by letter, until their own system collapsed under the weight of their paperwork. So let's start with step 1. I sat down at my computer and drafted a single page letter. No personal details, no ranting, nothing emotional, just a clear explanation of what I had discovered. In the letter, I explained that according to the bylaws, all communication with the HOA had to be conducted via certified mail. I laid out the exact language word for word and included instructions on how any homeowner could request a copy of the bylaws themselves, also by certified mail. I even included the HOA's mailing address and sample language they could use. In other words, I had just given every single person in that neighborhood the key to unlock the HOA's little game, but I didn't stop there. I also included a warning for anyone who had received a violation notice or worse, a notice of intent to lien. I explained how the HOA's process was invalid if it hadn't been handled through certified mail, and how homeowners could challenge it. I didn't tell anyone what to do. I simply handed them the rules and let them decide for themselves. Once the letter was polished, I printed 150 copies, one for every single house in the neighborhood. That night, I roped in a couple of trusted neighbors, explained what I had found, and together we walked the streets, slipping a copy onto every doorstep. By the time the sun came up, the entire neighborhood had been armed with the truth. That was step 1. Step 2 was where the real fun began. I pulled out all of the violation notices from that packet and spread them across my dining room table. 8 unique violations, some of them repeated multiple times. The bylaws said each one had to be contested individually, so that's exactly what I was going to do. I created a template letter that politely but firmly contested each violation. In the body of each letter, I cited specific sections of the CC&Rs, or pointed out why the violation was invalid. For the trash cans, I included photos showing they were placed exactly where dozens of other neighbors kept theirs. For the grading issue, I attached my correspondence with the developer, proving the fault wasn't mine. For the Ring doorbell, I cited legal precedent that clearly allowed security devices for homeowner safety, but the real kicker came at the end of each letter. I included a formal request for official records, specifically proof of certified delivery for the original. Violation notice. Under Florida law, HOAs operate under something called rebuttable presumption. That means if a homeowner requests official records, the HOA has 10 business days to provide them. If they fail, they're the ones in violation. So I carefully customized each letter for each violation. When I was finished, I had 22 separate certified letters ready to go, one for every unique violation and repeat offense, plus an additional one formally contesting the lien itself. 23 letters in total. The next morning, I took 2 full days off work and marched down to the post office. The clerks must have thought I was insane as I handed over stack after stack of envelopes, each one prepared for certified delivery. By the time I was done, I had spent a little over $150 just on postage. But to me, it wasn't a cost, it was an investment. If the HOA wanted to play games, I was going to show them just how expensive their own rules could become. And I wasn't finished yet. 10 days later, when the HOA failed to respond to my requests, I sent another wave of certified letters, follow-ups reminding them that they were now in violation of Florida law. Every letter had to be signed for. Every letter created more paperwork. Every letter added to their pile of legal obligations. At this point, it wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about showing them what it felt like to be buried under endless bureaucracy. They had built a system designed to intimidate homeowners, but they had never expected anyone to actually use it against them. As I walked out of the post office after sending that second wave of letters, I couldn't help but smile. Because I knew something they didn't. This fight wasn't going to end with me. I had already given my neighbors the same ammunition, and soon the HOA would be drowning in certified mail from every corner of the neighborhood. This wasn't just a defense anymore. This was a war, and for the first time, I wasn't the one on the losing side. By the time I had mailed off my second wave of certified letters, the tone from the HOA had changed. At first, they had ignored me, confident that I would eventually back down and pay the fines, but now they were rattled. A week and a half later, I finally received a response, but it wasn't the stack of certified letters I was legally owed. Instead, it was just a single email, blunt, dismissive, and dripping with arrogance. It said something along the lines of, "All violations are valid. You have 25 days to comply, or the lien will proceed." I almost laughed out loud. After everything, after I had explicitly requested communication by certified mail, their big response was an email. They still didn't get it. They were so used to homeowners rolling over that they didn't realize I had them cornered, so I fired back a one-sentence reply. Just one line. All communications regarding violations must be done in approved communication methods, as per Article 9, Communication Methods, as per the bylaws. That was it, nothing more, because I knew that simple sentence carried the weight of a hammer. They had just admitted in writing that they weren't following their own rules. And now, the clock was ticking. The HOA had only a few days left to produce everything I'd requested. Certified mail records, receipts of delivery, proof that they had followed procedure. And they had to send it all by certified mail. Of course, nothing came. They had dug themselves into a hole they couldn't climb out of. But here's where things really got interesting. Remember those 150 flyers I passed? Around the neighborhood. Well, they worked. Within days, other homeowners started sending their own certified requests. One by one, people who had been quietly paying bogus fines realized they had been scammed. Some had active liens against their homes. Others were being threatened just like I was. And now, armed with the bylaws, they all knew exactly how to fight back. I later heard from a neighbor, whose husband happened to be married to one of the board members, that the HOA's office had turned into chaos. Certified mail was piling up daily. At one point, nearly 100 homes had officially requested copies of the bylaws via certified mail. That alone was almost enough to bankrupt them. Each response required the HOA to print and mail back a 29-page document, certified at their own expense, and it didn't stop there. Alongside the bylaw requests were dozens of challenges, complaints, and demands for official records. Every single one had to be responded to within 10 business days. Every single one had to be handled by certified mail. The board members had been trying to run their little operation on scare tactics and shortcuts. Now they were buried alive in paperwork. What made it worse for them was that they had active liens on several houses in the neighborhood, liens they had no legal ground to enforce. And while they scrambled to cover themselves, they were slapped with even more certified letters contesting every single violation they had ever issued. It was a tidal wave they couldn't hold back. For me, it was both surreal and satisfying. I'd gone from feeling like a victim, cornered and powerless, to watching an entire corrupt system collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. And the best part, I didn't even have to raise my voice. I just followed their rules more closely than they ever had. But the cherry on top came when the real reason behind their behavior was finally exposed. Through whispered conversations and neighborhood gossip, we learned the ugly truth. The board members weren't just being petty for the fun of it. They had been scheming. You see, at the front of the neighborhood was an undeveloped lot of land, facing the main road. The developer had planned to sell it to a commercial buyer, most likely to build a gas station or convenience store. But that land happened to sit right across from the homes of several board members. They didn't want their view spoiled. So the developer had offered to sell the land to the HOA instead, at a steep premium. The board's plan was simple: squeeze as much money as possible from the homeowners by inventing violations and racking up fines, then funnel that money into buying the land for themselves. They weren't protecting property values. They weren't enforcing community standards. They were bleeding their neighbors dry so they wouldn't have to look at a gas station out their front window. Once that truth started spreading, the board's days were numbered. Neighbors who had once been indifferent suddenly became furious. No one likes paying fines, but realizing those fines were being used to line the pockets of a corrupt board, that was unforgivable. The dominoes had begun to fall. The HOA wasn't just facing resistance from me anymore. They were facing an entire neighborhood that had woken up, armed with knowledge and ready to fight. And the more pressure mounted, the closer the board came to collapse. The first real crack in the board's armor came during a routine monthly HOA meeting. Normally only a handful of people ever showed up, the same tired faces nodding along while the board rubber-stamped their own decisions. But this time the room was packed. Dozens of homeowners showed up, many holding folders stuffed with certified letters, copies of bylaws, and unanswered requests. When the board president tried to brush everyone off with his usual smug tone, the crowd erupted. Neighbors started reading their violation letters out loud. People demanded proof of liens, receipts for fines, and explanations for why thousands of dollars were missing from the HOA's bank account. For the first time, the board couldn't hide. Their intimidation tactics had run dry. The room they once controlled with fear was now buzzing with anger and defiance. And sitting quietly in the back, I couldn't help but smile. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The pressure only grew from there. Within days, multiple homeowners had contacted lawyers. Some had reached out to the county. Others even filed formal complaints with the state attorney general's office. What started as my personal fight had snowballed into a full-blown investigation. And then came the knockout punch. One of the neighbors who worked in real estate discovered public records showing the board's scheme. The HOA had been negotiating to purchase that undeveloped lot, using funds that were never approved by the homeowners. Not only was it shady, it was flat-out illegal. Word spread like wildfire. By the next HOA meeting, the board president and treasurer didn't even show up. They resigned quietly, hoping to avoid the humiliation of being voted out in public. The remaining members tried to hold on, but their credibility was already gone. Within a month, every single board seat was up for election, and this time the neighborhood showed up in force. The vote was decisive. Not one of the old board members survived. In their place, a new group of homeowners was elected, people who had lived through the nightmare and wanted to make sure nothing like it ever happened again. The first order of business: cancel every bogus violation, rescind every lien, wipe The slate clean. When I got the official notice that my $4,000 in fines had been nullified, I just sat back and let out the deepest sigh of relief I'd had in months. It wasn't just about the money. It was about proving that we didn't have to live under the thumb of bullies in suits pretending to protect the community. But the story didn't end there. The investigation into the old board revealed more than anyone expected. Mismanaged funds, secret deals, even personal reimbursements for expenses that were never approved. There were whispers that 1 or 2 board members might actually face legal consequences. Whether that ever happened, I don't know. But the fact that they had to run from their own neighbors in disgrace was satisfaction enough. As for the new HOA, things changed overnight. Instead of constant threats and fines, communication actually became respectful. If someone had a violation, like forgetting to pull their trash cans in, they got a polite reminder instead of a lien threat. Neighbors started showing up to meetings again, not out of fear, but because they genuinely cared about shaping the community. Looking back, it's almost funny how the whole thing unraveled. The HOA thought they could bully one homeowner into submission. They thought I'd be just another check in their bank account. Instead, I turned their own bylaws into a weapon and proved that even the most corrupt system can't stand up to persistence and a little bit of intelligence. The truth is, I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a politician. I was just an ordinary guy who refused to be pushed around. And that's why this victory felt so sweet. Because in the end, the HOA didn't just lose. They destroyed themselves, their greed, their arrogance, their shortcuts. All of it came crashing down the second someone forced them to follow the rules they claimed to enforce. Now when I drive through my neighborhood, I don't see it the way I used to. I don't feel that knot of dread in my stomach when I turn onto my street. Instead, I see a community that stood up for itself, a place that went from being terrorized by its own HOA to taking back control. And every time I pass that empty lot, the one they were so desperate to buy with our money, I can't help but smile, because it's still sitting there undeveloped, a monument to their failure, a reminder that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, they can always fall. So if you're ever in a fight with your HOA, remember this. You don't have to. Roll over, read the bylaws, learn the rules, and don't be afraid to use their own system against them. It might take time, it might take patience, but in the end, you just might win. And that's how one corrupt HOA collapsed under the weight of its own greed. What started as a simple letter taped to my door turned into a battle that changed our entire neighborhood forever. If you've ever dealt with an HOA like this, you already know the stress, the frustration, the feeling of being powerless. But, trust me, you're not powerless. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to fight back. This was my story. But it's far from the only one. HOAs across the country pull the same stunts every single day, and more people are standing up to them. If you want to hear more real stories of homeowners fighting back and winning, make sure to check out the other videos on this channel. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next HOA nightmare or revenge story. Thanks for watching, and remember, no HOA is above the law.